Every second, enough water to fill an Olympic swimming pool crashes over Niagara Falls. It has done this without pause for 12,000 years. Storms couldn't stop it, winters couldn't stop it, time couldn't stop it. Then, one morning in 1969, the waterfall disappeared. No water, no mist, no roar. Just bare rock, exposed to the sky for the first time in millennia. It wasn't a drought. It wasn't a disaster. A team of engineers did this on purpose. This is the story of why they turned off a waterfall, what they found underneath it, and the decision that determined whether Niagara Falls would ever flow the same way again. Niagara wasn't just a waterfall. It powered millions of homes. To understand why anyone would dare stop Niagara, you first have to understand what Niagara actually is. It sits on the border between the United States and Canada, where Lake Erie drains into Lake Ontario. That drop creates not one waterfall, but three. The towering Horseshoe Falls on the Canadian side, and on the American side, the American Falls and the smaller Bridal Veil Falls. Together, they form one of the most visited natural landmarks on Earth, a tourism engine worth billions of dollars a year, and a symbol recognized on almost every continent. Here's a number worth sitting with. At peak flow, Niagara Falls moves enough water every minute to fill over 100 Olympic swimming pools. That's not a trickle of energy. It's a force capable of generating millions of horsepower. And that force doesn't just look impressive, it works. Niagara's hydroelectric stations have supplied electricity to millions of homes for over a century, making it one of the most important power sources in North America. There's one more number that matters here. Geologists estimate that over the last 12,000 years, the erosion of the falls has pushed them backward, upstream, by several miles. Niagara has never truly stood still. It has always, slowly, been eating away at itself. Which is exactly why what happened next was so alarming. The danger wasn't visible, but engineers couldn't stop looking. Tourists never saw it. Photographers never saw it. Millions of people stood at the railing every year and saw only beauty. But a small group of engineers kept coming back to the same spot on the American side, studying it, measuring it, returning again and again. They had noticed something almost no one else had. Niagara Falls has always had a quiet, dangerous secret. It is slowly destroying itself. Every year, the relentless force of the water erodes the cliff face beneath it. Rock shears off. Boulders collapse into the gorge below. Over centuries, the falls have actually moved, carving backward into the land foot by foot. By the 1960s, surveys confirmed what those engineers suspected. The American Falls had a weakening cliff face, buried under mounds of collapsed rock from decades of unseen erosion. Local newspapers had already run stories about sudden rock falls startling visitors, small warnings that most people forgot within a week. The engineers didn't forget. The question they kept asking themselves was uncomfortable. Could the American Falls survive another century of this, or was it slowly crumbling toward collapse? To find out, there was only one way to see the true extent of the damage. They would have to look at the rock face directly. Every crack, every fracture, every loose boulder. There was just one problem. That rock face had been buried under a waterfall for 12,000 years. No living person had ever seen it. Their solution sounded impossible. The task fell to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, an organization used to building dams and taming rivers, but never anything quite like this. When the proposal was first put forward, Many engineers who heard it simply didn't believe it could work. Stop Niagara Falls? Even people inside the project weren't sure. Their plan sounded almost impossible. Build a temporary wall, called a cofferdam, across the Niagara River and reroute its flow entirely around the American Falls. Understand the scale of that ambition. This wasn't diverting a stream. This was redirecting one of the most powerful rivers in North America, using rock, earth, and thousands of tons of material to dry out a waterfall for the first time in recorded history. The numbers alone are staggering. Crews moved an estimated 27,000 tons of rock and earth to build the cofferdam, a temporary wall stretching roughly 600 feet across the river, built high enough and strong enough to hold back a force that had never once in human history been fully contained. Hundreds of workers took part in the construction. Heavy equipment ran around the clock. Engineers monitored water pressure hour by hour, watching for any sign that the dam wouldn't hold. Stopping a waterfall, it turned out, meant controlling an entire river, and getting it wrong wasn't really an option. Because if the dam failed under pressure, the consequences wouldn't just be an engineering embarrassment. They could be catastrophic. It's worth asking, watching this unfold, if the decision had been yours, would you have risked it? Over several months in 1969, crews worked without rest, watching the water level on the American side begin, almost unbelievably, to fall. For the crews on site, it wasn't just a job. Some of them knew they might be witnessing something no engineer would ever get to see again, and that if it went wrong, it could be the last thing they ever built. Something that had never been attempted before was actually starting to work. Then, the water disappeared. And then it happened. Day by day, the roar quieted, the mist thinned, and the riverbed hidden for 12,000 years slowly came into view. By June of 1969, the American Falls were reduced to a trickle. For the first time in living memory, people could walk out and stand where a waterfall used to be. The reaction was immediate. Front-page headlines, live broadcasts, families staring at bare rock where postcards had promised a roar. Hard-hatted engineers walked ground no human had touched in thousands of years. It was one of the strangest sights in American engineering history. Niagara Falls, silent. But the real story hadn't even started yet. Because what the engineers were about to find on that exposed rock face would raise a question nobody had fully prepared for. The biggest surprise wasn't geological. Walking onto that riverbed felt like stepping into a different era entirely. For the engineers assigned to the inspection, this wasn't just field work, it was exploration. Ground that had been hidden from every human eye since before recorded history began. Several of them later admitted it felt less like an inspection and more like trespassing somewhere they weren't meant to go. They found the first crack almost immediately. A deep fracture running far back into the stone, wider than anyone had expected from surface studies alone. Then, deeper into the riverbed, enormous boulders, some the size of small houses, scattered across ground that had been submerged for millennia. Each one told a story of a moment, sometime in the deep past, when a piece of the falls had simply given way. The team mapped layer after layer of rock, some worn smooth by centuries of relentless force, others so unstable they looked ready to collapse without warning. It confirmed what the surveys had hinted at for years. The cliff face really was weakening, in more places than anyone had realized. And then they found something that had nothing to do with geology at all. Scattered among the rocks lay decades of debris swallowed by the falls. Old coins, personal belongings, forgotten trash. A strange time capsule, left behind by generations of visitors who had tossed a coin over the railing and never imagined anyone would stand exactly where it landed. It was a strange, almost eerie feeling for the cruise, standing in a place built entirely from things people never expected to see again. The inspection had answered one question. The cliff face was indeed weakening, and in some places, dangerously so. But it had also opened a much bigger one. Now that the falls were dry and every flaw was laid bare, should they be repaired at all? Or was there something better to be done while they had the chance? The hardest decision came after the inspection. The findings sparked a genuine divide. Two groups now stood on opposite sides, and both believed the future of Niagara depended on which one won. One camp argued the falls should stay dry, permanently. Without water, repairs would be easier and cheaper, and removing the loose rock entirely could make the cliff genuinely stable for centuries, rather than left to erode unpredictably. Some went further, arguing a fully re-engineered cliff face would be safer, even more impressive than the natural but crumbling version millions had grown up with. The other camp believed the waterfall had to return exactly as it always had been. Niagara wasn't just rock and water. It was a symbol, a tourism economy, a piece of history photographed and honeymooned at for generations. A repaired but permanently dry Niagara, however stable, simply wouldn't be Niagara at all. It came down to one question: what does a natural wonder owe the people who love it? Permanence or authenticity? There was no obviously right answer, which is exactly why the people making this call in 1969 couldn't agree either. In the end, officials decided full removal wasn't necessary. Selective reinforcement, careful monitoring, and letting the river run its natural course. That was the path forward. The waterfall would return. But first, the wall holding back an entire river had to come down. The waterfall had one final journey to make. By November of 1969, the cofferdam was removed. The river did what rivers do, roaring back, first as a trickle, then a rush, until the American Falls thundered again as if nothing had changed. Crowds gathered once more, this time to watch the water return, just as remarkable a sight as watching it vanish. Some who'd seen it dry later said they never truly appreciated the roar until they'd stood in the silence. The project was a success. Niagara had been examined, understood, and left standing, not because nature demanded it, but because people chose to let it. Every year, millions of people still stand beside Niagara Falls. They hear the roar. They feel the mist on their faces. Almost none of them realize they're witnessing a natural wonder that once disappeared, because people chose to save it. Not because of catastrophe, not because nature forced it to stop, but because a group of people looked at something the world assumed was permanent and decided it was worth silencing for a season, so it could keep flowing for generations still to come. Sometimes preserving history means changing it, just long enough to save it.